Right. Nazi Germany. One of the questions that comes up very commonly is about the Nazi dictatorship. How did Hitler establish a dictatorship or totalitarian control, which means absolute control over Germany? Now, remember that Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, January 1933. Now, initially, he didn't have a great deal of power or control. Remember, the Nazis were a minority in the cabinet. Von Papen expected to be able to control Hitler. However, by 1934, Hitler had established a one-party dictatorship in Germany. The question is, how did he do this? Now, on the face of it, it looks to be quite difficult because it's such a big question, but that actually makes it easy. There are lots of very simple things that you need to remember. And if you do this chronologically, it's very easy. So, 1. Hitler became Chancellor in January 1933. Now, the first thing he wants to do is to get rid of opposition. Now, Hitler's greatest threat, or potential threat, in terms of power, was the Communists. They were the second most popular party in Nazi Germany. So, that's the first people that Hitler needs to get rid of. Now, what Hitler did was he called for an election on the 5th of March 1933 because he wanted a complete majority in Germany. Remember, he'd said earlier to the Nazi party after the failed Munich Putsch, we must hold our noses and enter the Reichstag. This is part of how he's going to do that. So, calls an election in March. Now, fortunately for Hitler, or unfortunately for everybody else, in February the 27th, 1933, there was a fire at the Reichstag building. Now, there's a lot of debate over who did this. Actually, it doesn't really matter to us who did it. What matters is how Hitler used it. Now, the fire started in the Reichstag, which is the German parliament, and it burnt it down. Now, a Dutch communist, Van der Lubbe, L-U-B-B-E, was discovered there and fessed up. Unfortunately, he was a sort of a lunatic and slightly deranged, but he accepted responsibility for this. Now, doesn't matter whether he did it or not, doesn't matter whether the Nazis did it and blamed it on the communists. What matters is that Hitler used it as an excuse. Right? And he used it as an excuse to try and attack the communists. Now, straight after this, Hindenburg declared a state of emergency. That's the first thing. You have to use that phrase, state of emergency. And he gave Hitler the power to rule by decree, which means he didn't have to go to the Reichstag anymore. He could just make a law or make a decision. And Hitler's first thing he did was arrest 4,000 communists, blaming them for the Reichstag fire. Now, he calls for a new election in March 1933, but he also passes the Decree for the Protection of the People and the State. The Decree for the Protection of the People and the State. If you can say that in your exam, it makes you look so clever. All right? It's worth learning that one. Now, what that did was it suspended all civil rights in Germany. That means all the rights for people that they have enshrined in law, their protection. Now, what he did was he imprisoned political opposition and he banned the communist newspapers. But also, it gave him the control of the police. That's very, very important, bearing in mind a week later there's going to be an election. And he told the police and the courts to turn a blind eye to the SA. And meanwhile, the SA were out beating up communists and breaking up their meetings and basically damaging the communist chances in the March election. In addition to this, elections are very, very, very expensive, and Hitler needed cash. So what he did was he had various meetings with top industrialists, the main one being the Krupps company. And they agreed to finance the Nazi party, which gave Hitler loads of cash to spend on elections, which made he could get his message out even more. In one meeting alone, those financiers offered him 3 million marks in one meeting. Now, the election of March 1933 was actually a bloody election. There were 70 deaths. Okay? And a lot of these were caused by the SA and the communists fighting each other. Remember, both had private armies. Now, in the election, the Nazis won 288 seats. This is their biggest election victory by far, but it's still not a majority. Okay, still wasn't. So, what Hitler did was he used his emergency powers to ban the Communist Party from taking up their 81 seats. Now, what What that meant was that Hitler, with his allies, some nationalists, small nationalist parties, Hitler had a 2/3 majority in the Reichstag. Now that meant he could legally change the constitution. Now the constitution are the rules that govern how a country is run. So, what he did is really important. It's called the Enabling Act. Now, the 23rd of March 1933, Hitler passed the Enabling Act. Now, more formally, it's known as the Law for the Removal of the Distress of the People and the Reich. The Law for the Removal of the Distress of the People and the Reich. Now, the fact that I'm looking at my notes to try to remember that shows you, actually, if you call it the Enabling Act, it's fine. You don't need to know that big posh expression. But if you do, you get some good marks. Now, what the Enabling Act enabled Hitler to do was to rule for 4 years without the Reichstag. He could make any law he wanted. Now, you're probably thinking, hang on, why did the Reichstag vote for themselves not to have any power? It's very simple. Hitler had a majority. Plus, all the other guys in the Reichstag were intimidated. Hitler stationed the SS, his bodyguards, the guys in the black uniforms, on all the corridors. And they stood there all stern-faced and looking really threatening. And the message was very simple. Don't mess with us. We're going to cause problems for you. You don't want to vote against this. And outside, Hitler had all the SA shouting, you know, come on, give us the Enabling Act, give us the Enabling Act, or you're going to get blood and murder, and it's going to be carnage. So all the people inside the Reichstag that weren't Nazis or nationalists started thinking, need to be kind of careful here. And as a consequence of Hitler and the nationalists and the intimidation by the SS and the SA, the Enabling Act was passed by 444 votes to 94. Now, so what Hitler's now got is the ability to rule without parliament. He's a dictator. But he's still got opposition that threaten him. And the biggest opposition to Hitler are the trade unions. Bearing in mind he's banned the Communist Party already. The next place where communists are most commonly found is within the trade unions. Now, they represent the interests and the rights of the workers. And the workers traditionally tended to support the communists in Nazi Germany. In Germany, sorry. And the communists dominated the trade unions. And trade unions had the power to strike. And if all the workers went on strike, it could cause some major problems for Germany. So Hitler, in May 1933, banned trade unions. Made strikes illegal. So there's no Communist Party, and there's no trade unions, and there's no strikes. So Hitler's got rid of one of the greatest threats to him. Now, in July, he goes a stage further, and he decrees that all political parties, except the Nazis or the NSDAP, all political parties are illegal. Now, basically, the leaders of all the other political parties were either arrested or fled abroad. The clever ones fled, because the guys that were arrested were sent to the very first concentration camp. And that was Dachau, D-A-C-H-A-U, Dachau. Set up in 1933 for political opponents. Please don't confuse that with an extermination camp, such as Auschwitz. A concentration camp is merely somewhere where large numbers of prisoners are concentrated in one area. Okay? So he banned all the political parties, and then in January 1934 he went a stage further. Now in Germany you had the Reichstag that controlled the majority of Germany, but inside Germany there were 18 Länder. Now I'm probably pronouncing that awfully. In fact, I'm definitely pronouncing it awfully. L-A-N-D-E-R. Now that's regions. There were 18 regions in Germany, and they each had their own little parliament. Now that's a potential threat to Hitler. He didn't control them. So what he did, funnily enough, is he banned them. And he abolished all the Länder, and he appointed 18 Nazi governors to control each of the regions of Germany. Now, this is very, very important, because by January 1934, Hitler's got rid of political opponents, opposition parties, trade unions, and local government. The Nazis are in power. Okay? Now, there's a lot of information there, but very simply, just remember, January, Hitler comes to power. February, there's a fire, which Hitler uses to ban the opposition and pass emergency powers. In the election, he uses those emergency powers to gain a large majority of people of support. Once he's got that support and the support of the nationalists as well, he passes the Enabling Act, number 4. He passes the Enabling Act, and then in May he bans trade unions using the Enabling Act. In July, he bans political parties, and in January 1934, he abolishes the Land Air. Okay? Now, it stems from two things. The emergency powers he's given to first of all, and the Enabling Act. Now, most common mistake is that most people get those two things mixed up. Don't. The emergency powers comes first, and then the Enabling Act. All right? Hope that makes sense. If I was you, I would do this as a flow diagram to make sense of it all and see how it all slots together. All right? I would rewind this. I would use your textbook, use your revision books and your student workbooks, anything like that to help you. Hope that's been of some help.